The DCEU is and was very divisive, and some people love some movies, others hate those same movies, and in the fact that this universe is divisive means that it absolutely worked for some and absolutely did not for others. I am in the group that, for the most part, this universe did work for me, at least a number of the films did, and that is not to say you were wrong for hating maybe every movie on this list, just understand that that's not the sentiment I share here, for better and for worse. Today I'm going to rank the entire DCEU movies from worst to best with some potential hot takes along the way. Everybody's ranking is going to look different, and it should. This isn't a list of objective facts, this is a ranking of subjective opinions. I'm not wrong, you're not wrong. Let's just have some fun ranking this thing one last time. We're going to disagree, that's the fun part. Just try not to be a dick, okay? Coming in last place, easily for me, is Justice League. I think when this film originally came out, I sighed a bit of relief, like, finally, DC did it! They actually released a Justice League movie, and hey, my favorite comic book character was in it, The Flash! Yay! Although the CGI was unfinished, and the film was released so that WB executives at the time could get their bonus, they took advantage of Zack Snyder's daughter passing away, and brought in Joss Whedon to complete this film in a completely different way than Zack Snyder intended. Just a trimmed down, messy, unnecessarily reshot movie with all the changes making the film worse. Coming in at number 16 is the theatrical cut of BVS. Now, this is a film I've only watched once since the Ultimate Edition came out. If you don't know, the theatrical edition has 30 minutes removed. It's PG-13 instead of the original intended R rating. It has scenes rearranged and outright removed character development, plot, character motivations. I mean, this film from start to finish is a subpar and confusing edit of the director's vision for this movie, and I refuse to rewatch it. Number 15, we have Suicide Squad. Another example of WB getting cold feet and altering the plans that Zack Snyder had for this universe in the first phases of movies, altering David Ayer's film beyond recognition, having a trailer company come in and complete the film, trying to make it less dark and less emotional and more funny and entertaining like the Deadpool and Guardians movies. I think it's obvious that this movie no way could have been as bad as the version we ended up getting in Suicide Squad and Justice League. We would have had a very different DCEU if BVS, Suicide Squad, and Justice League, 3 out of their first 5 projects, weren't completely deconstructed during the production process. Number 14, a later film, but we have Wonder Woman 84. This film pretty much right away left a lot of fans feeling dissatisfied and unhappy, especially with releasing it on HBO Max at the time, as it was being released in theaters at the same time. The film itself is too silly, too bright, too random and weird, with a lot of bizarre creative decisions, especially regarding our villains, Steve Trevor, and especially the third act. Not the worst film of all time. There's still some enjoyment I get out of the first half of the movie or so, and the action and the suits are pretty cool. Get some Richard Donner vibes in there here throughout, but a messy, messy movie. Number 13, we have Birds of Prey. Now, I know this is a little low compared to most people, but I do get enjoyment out of this movie without having major critiques, but also without loving the film we got. I understand the unreliable narrator and being inspired by Guy Ritchie films, but to me it just simply never worked. I felt too much of a connection to Deadpool and too much of a pendulum shift, just not the direction I wanted the DCEU to go for me personally. And although it's entertaining enough, the characters don't emotionally pull me back to it. But I do like the film enough, as well as every film continuing on this list. Number 12, we have Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. It's hard to rank some of these so low, but there's just so much DCEU that I do quite enjoy, and for me this one is a little too late. It should have came out before The Flash. It's not designed to end anything, whereas at least The Flash kind of is. I loved the relationship between Arthur and Orm in this movie and the first, and that's why it worked so well for me. I personally thought Orm was one of the best DCEU villains, so kind of giving him a redemption arc in here was nice to see, but the film, like many comic book movies lately, just was too silly, leaned far too hard on humor that didn't land. Also, the overall plot is stuff we saw in the first movie and other comic book movies, just without as much Amber Heard in it. So I was entertained by this movie a lot, but I have some issues. Number 11, we have Blue Beetle. This is a character I've always loved although maybe haven't been the most familiar with his character. Anytime Blue Beetle shows up in the comics or games or animated shows, I'm always down for him, and I'm very glad this character is going to go forward into the DCU. I myself, while liking the family aspects from this film, I felt the superhero aspects itself were far too familiar. Granted, this was intended to be an HBO Max movie originally, so I give it some slack on the CGI, some technical stuff like that, but a fun, heartwarming, at times a bit generic comic book movie. Cracking the top 10, we have Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Several of the DCEU films that came out during this era kind of suffer from, I feel like, some of the same issues, an over-reliance on comedy, raising the stakes and the scope, but not raising the intensity or the tone of the movie. And that's what made the first movie so special, was that there's so much heart with Billy, his family, wanting a new family. They play into that in Fury of the Gods, but not nearly enough as they could or should have, while cranking the comedy up to 11. This film got a lot of undeserved hate, in my opinion. If it didn't work for you, that's totally fine, but I think it's a fine enough summer blockbuster with some fun, some heart, and some laughs. Number 9, we have Black Adam, and yet another, at times, semi-generic film with some semi-generic themes or tones or characters, but a film that I had a lot of fun, not because of The Rock's quips to me, but because of the action, brutality we get from Black Adam. He's kind of an anti-hero, so he adds something a little bit different. I myself am a huge Black Adam fan from the comics and the character itself, and the character I grew up reading was not the same as Dwayne's version, which left me disappointed. He's not the Terminator. That being said, the Justice Society, the score, the action, some comedy really did work for me. The story had some interesting twists along the way on Black Adam's backstory. Again, a very fun, entertaining watch, but with some flaws. Number 8, we have Aquaman, and this to me is a highly entertaining comic book film and a great DCEU film, even though it's, yes, got a lot of Amber Heard, has some cheesy lines here and there, but I've always loved Jason Momoa in this role, and I'm sure he'll crush it as Lobo one day. I loved Patrick Wilson as Orm, and Black Manta was set up great in this movie. Some well-choreographed action set pieces, some great-looking CGI, maybe not Cameron level, but with James Wan directing, you have those sprinkles of horror, and I have always had a good time with this movie. A big win for DC at the time. Number 7, and honestly, number 7 through number 3, I could rearrange tomorrow, so my number 7 and number 3 kind of on the same tier, but is The Suicide Squad. When this film came out, so many people wanted James Gunn to take over DC, and look where we are now. It's funny how quick general consensus changes for a lot of people. I totally get why this film is most people's favorite DCEU film, and I have no argument against that. It's damn near flawless. The characters are delightfully written, you care about every character, there's emotion sprinkled throughout this bloody action war movie with comic book characters. It's an experience like very few other comic book movies can give you. This is the Suicide Squad movie we should have gotten in the first place, and I love it more and more with each rewatch. Number 6, though, and a slight higher for me, is Shazam. Now, I myself did have a bit of time in the foster care system, although I was never adopted, so it's refreshing for me to see a setting like that in a comic book film, or hell, even a film in general, where not every hero's mommy is a good person. Not every character is rich. Not every character is super smart. Some have had to lead with what they know best, which is their heart or their family, and those are reasons why I've always loved the original Captain Marvel, Shazam. This film is funny, heartwarming, charming, got some good action off a modest budget, and I know the suit isn't for everyone. It's got some extra padding, maybe, and it's a lower budgeted suit, but Zach Levi did get jacked for this movie. He did put in the hard work, couldn't have played this version of Shazam any better. This movie was almost ripped straight out of the New 52 comics. They handled this movie very responsibly and is one of my favorite DCEU films and has been one of the best received films critically in the DCEU. Number 5, we have the Ultimate Edition of BVS. Now, I could go all day on about writing errors, overstuffed, overcomplicated plots, plot holes, list out tons of flaws for films like this, for The Flash, but if I'm being honest, the films that stick in my head the longest are the ones I'm emotionally drawn back towards, and the characters I grew up with were Superman, Batman, and The Flash. This is an epic, highly ambitious, but flawed film. I can get past most of those flaws, and I'd say the majority of my issues with this film are fixed in the Ultimate Edition. This film did, though, come way too early in the DCEU, no mistake about it, but I do love the characters in this film, how this movie connects and sets up the rest of the DCEU, and with all its flaws, I still always find myself fascinated by the questions being asked in this movie, the themes that take place in the context of the movie. It's certainly not for everyone, but one that sticks with me. Number 4, we have Wonder Woman, the DCEU's first big critical and financial hit, and Patty Jenkins, with the Snyders attached, was able to really bring this character to life in her first yet long-awaited standalone adventure. This is easily one of DC's best-made films ever. The score, the characters are written very well. All of the side characters have their own motivations, personalities, different senses of humor. Yes, not everyone needs to be funny or quippy the same way in every movie, and this movie does that beautifully. Also, so many different philosophical questions are being asked in this movie, like in BVS and Man of Steel, but also with underlying themes like love, humanity, warfare, feminism, sexism, and also tons of Greek god lore. The action, the visuals, the cinematography, everything about this movie feels very much a part of the Snyderverse, while also building itself out and not being constrained to a shared cinematic universe. Number 3, we have The Flash. Look, I won't defend the internet's biggest punching bag since Green Lantern. If you couldn't watch this film because of Ezra Miller, in a way, I get it. The CGI in a lot of places looked awful. Andy Muschietti defending it made it worse. This is one of DC's most iconic characters getting their long 20-plus year in the making debut of their own standalone adventure. I have loved The Flash for as long as I can remember, with thousands of people working on this film for years, bringing together the Batman I grew up with in Michael Keaton, giving us the best Supergirl I think we've ever had, Ben Affleck's final yet amazing performance as Bruce Wayne and Batman, the last time we might see Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and a solid Flash. Not our best Flash, but not our worst. Their performances and the emotional story is what made this film really work for me. Having recently lost a parental figure too early in life, wanting to go back, spend even a moment despite knowing the consequences of how life really works is something I personally can strongly relate to. Not to mention the Flashpoint story is one of my all-time favorite comic runs, and the DCEU version of that with the connections to Man of Steel really resonated with me. This movie also canonized Zack Snyder's Justice League, maybe too little too late, but I appreciated that. This movie also had an underrated score and underrated story. This movie is easy to pick apart and to pick on, and people who like it are even easier to pick on. Some weird stuff in the third act, for sure, but a really great emotional DC film. Number 2, we have Zack Snyder's Justice League, easily one of the greatest comic book movies ever made, in my opinion. This movie made it so hard to watch Justice League, which was already hard to watch, and honestly made that cut probably unwatchable. Everything about this version of Justice League is by far an improvement to me. The amount of time and development each character is given is incredible. Each character feels truly important and significant. The cinematography is great. The score is fantastic. The acting is amazing. The cast have great chemistry with one another. Each character has a purpose and is fulfilling a need. This movie is truly epic in scope, in delivery, in everything. Some of the all-time best comic book movie moments happen in this movie and franchise, and it is just honestly too damn bad that we won't ever get a sequel. But number 1 is Man of Steel. This is the film when I first saw the teaser, when I went to go see The Dark Knight Rises, is when I knew I needed to get into movie news. Keeping tabs on movie news, because the fact that this movie was coming out in a year and I had no idea it was even being developed, I knew I had to change that. And this is the one that started it all for me and for the DCEU. Even though Green Lantern was going to start a universe that never took off, David Goyer and Christopher Nolan, with writer's block on The Dark Knight Rises, came up with Man of Steel and pitched it to the studio and Zack Snyder, and boom, the rest is history. You have the cinematography and visual storytelling from Zack Snyder with the creative juice from David Goyer and the cinema genius that is Christopher Nolan. You end up with a grounded yet polarizing version of the character. To me, this version of Superman has never been depressed. He's just been put in a more realistic or depressing or grounded world. This movie was dark, there's no way around that, but it does make kind of a perfect jumping off point leading up to the bright finale that ends up being Justice League. It also has many philosophical underlying themes, tones, and asks big world-changing questions. They took the Superman mythos, shifted a couple of things, made a sci-fi first contact story, which in many ways Superman is. Sometimes the execution isn't for everyone. Like Superman killing Zod in Superman 2 was no big deal, but Superman killing Zod in Man of Steel, that's not Superman. Superman would never do that. That is the kind of divisiveness that would haunt this film when it came out. And maybe a little bit less so in years prior, but more because more people have come around toward this movie, but still not everyone, and that's totally understandable. You aren't wrong for disliking this movie, just as I am not wrong for loving it. This film is divisive, as is the entire DCEU, for many different reasons, but the fact that it is divisive means it is telling a story that many people resonated with and many did not. I had a Man of Steel cake, a visual dictionary, a poster, a book, and a very special movie-going experience with my family 10 years ago. To me, Man of Steel is easily one of the best comic book movies ever made, one of the best scores in a comic book movie ever, maybe Hans Zimmer's best work, and to me, just a few of the reasons as to why it's number one. I'm sure if you made it this far, you are a pretty reasonable person who can either agree to disagree, or maybe you agreed with everything I said, and that's how you ended up here this long. If you can't tell, being a DC fan has been hard. It's even harder being a DC fan around other DC fans sometimes. That being said, I'd love to hear your final DCEU movie ranking in the comments below. How did it stack against my list? I'd love to see it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, I'd ask you to like and subscribe, as it really does help support us more than you know. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.